Welcome back to my channel. If you are new, welcome to my channel. And this is Mama Beauties here. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification button. Even if you don't care for me, hit that subscribe button so I can go live and you can openly call me out. So, even my haters are welcome. But let's get started. I am trying to get through this book as quickly as possible, so sorry if I am talking fast. I am just trying to make these videos to where they don't take so long to upload. I can make a video in 30 minutes and it takes 2 hours to upload, so must be my internet. But let's get started. Chapter 9, she started it. It is called The Weekend of the Murders, and at the beginning of every single one of these chapters, all the way up until this chapter, she has given like a little quote, a little inspirational quote from somebody. Well, she didn't have one here. It's blank. So, I don't know if I'm allowed to show the book or not. I can't remember. So it starts out with, let me put my glasses on because it's not as bright in here as it was before. Shanann, leaving for Arizona is how the book starts out. And Christopher and the girls decide they had to stay home because Chris had to work. And this is how they worked that out. Is Chris would stay at home and bond with the girls. And Shanann would go on her trips. And he would go occasionally. So that Saturday evening, Chris decided to tell Shanann that he was going to a Broncos game with his buddies. And in fact, he was going on a date with Nikki. And he hired a babysitter, and the two of them went out. And he had never gotten a babysitter before when Shanann was out of town. And so this was something that Shanann really wasn't comfortable with. But I'm sure she didn't argue because they were already on rocky ground. And so she probably did believe he was going out with his friends at that point. So him and Nikki went out to dinner at a bar and grill, and Christopher used the last of his gift cards. He had been putting their dates and stuff that they did together on gift cards so Shanann would not find out. And this time he did not do that. He decided to use their personal account, and it was over $62. Well, then the author goes in to earlier that afternoon, Chris's friend had called him up and told him that he really did have tickets to the Broncos game, and did Chris want to go with him? Well, Christopher says that this is one of those times, this is the second time that he thinks God gave him to turn around and back out, because he said he actually thought about telling Nikki that he couldn't find a babysitter and really going to this game. So that, Chris says, was his second chance from God that he did not take, obviously. And remember, the first chance was when his car ran off the side of the road, which he says he did not do, that God did. And he was on his way to see Nikki, and he still didn't turn around then. So he did not take the first chance, or he did not take the second chance that God gave him. So he went out with Nikki instead. And as usual, he ended up telling Shanann what he spent. And we all know that she said to keep the receipt. And that it seems like Chris wanted Shanann to find out. Because why was he being so reckless and careless? And the author seems to think that this was the closest he could get to telling her about Nikki. And so he used the card because he was too scared to tell her himself. So immediately Shanann knew something was not right and that it was too much for one person. And she knew that Christopher had never drank more than 1 or 2 beers. And so she looked up the menu online, and Christopher told her that he had had salmon and a beer. And she shared this with her girlfriends at the Thrive convention, and they absolutely agreed that that was just too much money for one person. And the author goes into talking about how normally affairs last from 6 to 8 weeks, and that Chris and Nikki were well into their time frame. And under normal circumstances, had Nikki left Chris alone even just a little bit, he probably would have turned around. And the author is guessing that with as much as Shanann was fighting for her marriage, that she thinks that Shanann would have forgiven Chris. And they would have had an opportunity to build their marriage back and stay married. But Nikki knew that Shanann was home, and this scared her. This really worried her. She was used to having Chris all to herself for that whole time for 5 weeks, and so I'm sure whenever Shanann got back home on the 7th of August, she was panicking. I'm sure Nikki was freaking out, and so the author says that Nikki dug her nails into Chris deeper, and she was not letting up. And she also says, why was killing on Christopher's mind? Is 6 weeks really worth giving everything up? Usually no one is willing to give up their whole life and their family for a 6-week love affair. And the author says that his family was everything he ever wanted. And she knew that he loved them deeply, but Chris says he could feel himself going back and forth in his head about killing them. And obviously, a scenario was not planned all the way out. He didn't even think this through completely because he never even thought of her friends wondering where she was when she wasn't online. And why did Christopher feel that he couldn't just leave and have a girlfriend? The author seems to think that maybe it was because he's not following the rules this way, and that it didn't make sense to him to leave his wife and have a girlfriend, but murder made more sense to Chris. Okay, that's logical. Chris did ruin his own life. Everything he ever wanted, he threw it all away like it was trash, literally. And he knows that had he made different decisions, it would have changed everything. Had he taken that first chance that God gave him, had he taken the second, had he taken the third, and we'll get into the third later. And what was putting the roadblocks up in his head, and why could he not think normally? There was never a toxicology report done, but why would they? Because Chris was arrested days after the murder, so nothing really would have shown up except for like marijuana that lasts for 30 days. But alcohol and narcotics usually are out of your system in 3 days. And so there was never a psychological exam done either. And usually that is automatic done before a case. But most people get a complete workup when they go in for something like this, especially murder suspects. But we will never know what is wrong with him unless he decides to take a psychological exam. We all know that he's super evil and dark, but what kind of mental illness does he have? So his attorneys are the ones that said if he did an exam, that everything that he's told them could be used against him in court, and that the court would hear everything he ever said to get this psychological exam. So since he pled guilty, it really shouldn't have mattered, and he should have got it anyway. But for some reason, it meant something to Christopher, and he did not want that psychological exam done. Now, you know how Ronnie is quick to say bipolar and all of that. I feel like they made fun of and bashed mental illness growing up in his house, or I feel like they don't accept it. And so maybe Chris is scared that he's bipolar. And you know how his family talks about people being bipolar and how awful it is. And so maybe he's afraid that all those things that his family has been saying about people with mental illness, accusing Shanann of it, that maybe he might end up with it. Who knows? And so basically now if he wants a psychological workup done, it would be at his own expense. And Chris has no money, and so he would have to depend on his parents for it. And his parents said they would be willing to pay for it, but Christopher, again, does not want one. He does bring it back up at the end of the book, but from what I'm gathering, him and the author aren't talking anymore, and he's not happy with her, so I don't know if he will take her advice with the Asperger's thing. And again, I will get into that. And so one of the reasons why he wouldn't get this psychological exam. The author is saying her only guess is that maybe he's afraid of what he might hear, or is it worse to find out you're insane, or to realize that you don't live in reality, or find out that you're not insane and you still have the capacity to murder people. So, your whole family, actually. And she also says that society imprisons people without knowing the difference, and that society has no patience for the criminally insane, that they are just misfits to us, and that we basically put them away without any thought of why they are sick. And she said that a normal thinking person does not plan to kill his family. Oh, yep, that's very true. And yet there are many of cases just like Christopher's that are happening all the time. She goes into Christopher Coleman's case from 2007 and says it's just like Chris's because the guy murdered his wife and 2 sons, and he was actually the bodyguard of Joyce Myers, which is an evangelist, a woman evangelist, like Joel Osteen. Well, there's Joyce Myers. She has her own Bible and everything. So I imagine darkness probably tries to attack her all the time. Well, he was her bodyguard, and he received 4 life sentences, and that he is in the exact same prison as Christopher. And then she said another case, don't be getting mad at me for touching my hair, but she said another case in Illinois, Christopher Vaughn, he murdered his wife and 3 children by shooting them in the face at point blank range with a shotgun. And he later said the same thing, that he felt real darkness and evil around him. And right after the murders, this man, just like Chris, had absolutely no remorse. And when the police were questioning this man, they said that there was such a darkness around him that it was scary to the officers, and that he would not even put the names with his children for the officers. When they put pictures down, he would not put the names with their faces, and he would not even say the names of his wife and children. And he is also spending his life in prison. And what evil lurks that will put this into someone's mind? And why are some people susceptible to it? And why are some not? Christopher has a hard time looking people into the eye, the author says, and talking to them. And when she asked him why this is, he says that he's always been this way. And that his mother verified this by saying that when he was a teenager, he asked her the same thing. Why can't he look people in the eye when he's talking? And Cindy told him it was a sign of shyness. And the author says, was it? Or was it lack of confidence or social anxiety? She said, others will say that people can't look other people in the eye because they're lying about something. She said still today that Chris wants to follow the rules in prison, and he doesn't want to upset anyone, and that he's a model prisoner, and that he won't ask for anything or complain about anything. And that Christopher says he's never felt the emotion of anger until the morning of August 13th. And that doesn't seem possible or normal. That when he went into rage the morning of the murders and could not stop was his first confession. And now today, in his own words, he says he was not in a rage that morning, and that Shanann made him angry, but when he killed her, he was not in a rage, and that he wasn't in a rage until he got to the oil fields. So if he had been planning the murders, then he suddenly did not go into a rage because he had been planning this, right? The author asks, is this a learned ability to kill a loved one? Or is it genetics combined with a path taken as a younger person? She said, all things start in your mind. Is it insanity to have it come into your mind and entertain it? How is it the crime scene was so sloppy at the oil fields, especially for someone that planned these murders? His family feels that he pled guilty, he was pushed through the system, put in prison as quickly as possible, and thrown away. How ironic that they feel this about Christopher when that's exactly what he did to his family. Does society want to know what causes another human to do something like this? Maybe we could watch for signs of it. Maybe we could prevent it. Maybe there wasn't even any signs at all. Christopher hit it well, as do most people that plan stuff like this. He has a family that is left in the wake of everything that he's done. And maybe it would help Shanann's family to understand the disconnect that he had that morning and what caused it, and what caused a normal father, husband, and son to do something so unimaginable. The Ruseks loved Christopher like he was their own son. And they trusted him to care for their sweet, most valuable treasures. They would like to know why. Why do you do something like what he did? Christopher says he would like to have some of those questions answered himself. Christopher does not show emotion, the author says. And she's not sure if he's even capable of real emotions. He's called by many of us a narcissist. I firmly believed he is a narcissist. And she says that the definition of a narcissist is a person who has excessive interest in or admiration of themselves. And so there's a spectrum of narcissism, but Christopher does not fit the common narcissist. However, there is narcissistic rage, and that is a reaction to narcissistic injury. It is perceived threat to a narcissist's self-esteem or self-worth. That's what narcissistic injury means. It is a perceived threat to a narcissistic self-esteem or self-worth. So narcissistic injury is the cause of distress, and it can lead to dysregulation of behaviors, and that it leads to narcissistic rage. And that it is caused by one of three things: challenged confidence, injured self-esteem, or false sense of self. The fact that Christopher was so quiet means that he probably had both forms of expression, the silence and the rage. He did think of others besides himself, and they praised him so much about what a loving father and son-in-law and friend he was. And Chris cared for the girls' daily needs, and he picked them up from school, and he played with them, and he gave them baths, and he fed them, and he read them stories, and these are not usual traits of a narcissist. However, if his life was considered a threat to who he really was, then it probably did build up until he blew. That he was a simmering pot until he exploded. And exploded, she says he did. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all my love and supporters. Keep it clean in the comments, and just, I can handle constructive criticism. So if you want me to tweak something or change something, or if you have some advice, I'm more than happy to hear from you. Thank you. Bye.